Okay, so it might be the only Final Fantasy I've played, but hear me out, it's good, I promise.
Deal with this!
Final Fantasy XIII wasn't that at all. There's been like 10 other games since then. It all started with Final Fantasy. Then, Final Fantasy II. Final Fantasy III. Final Fantasy Legend. Final Fantasy Mystic Quest. Final Fantasy IV. Final Fantasy Tactics. Final Fantasy Legend 2. Final Fantasy V. Final Fantasy Unlimited. Final Fantasy Final Fantasy Unlimited. Final Fantasy Legends of the Crystals. Final Fantasy Unlimited on PC Adventure Labyrinth. Final Fantasy VII. Snowboarding. There's been about as many Final Fantasy games as there has been job opportunities that have rejected me. But from what I could tell, 13 stood out a bit from its considerable number of predecessors. The more hands-off approach in the previous games, where players just kind of explored the world around them at their own pace, visiting different towns, playing minigames and the like, was no longer there in Final Fantasy XIII. Instead, Square Enix decided that this time they'd do a complete 180 and put you through a 10-hour tutorial first. Because that's good game design. Hey guys, sorry, I know it's been a while, too long, but before we get into things, I've come bearing bad news. Unfortunately, Blue Sam has passed away from a fatal overdose. As such, I've been taking my time away to mourn. Also, yes, I'm Tarcode now. Ooh, look at me, I'm Tarcode. I'm handsome enough to be recording myself in front of a camera holding a
Let's
microphone.
fool around a little bit.
I'm Tarcode. Ooh. I'd like to ask all of you guys at home to come up with just some generic RPG-style names for me. Oh wait, it's a terrific audience tonight, really. Thanks guys, thanks for going on. Thanks. Hey, thanks, see you. Alright. What do we got here? Oh wow. If any of you at home said lightning, snow, hope, fang, or vanille, then you're in luck, you win! Hey, round of applause! And who could forget Saz, or who I like to call the only black person in the entirety of this game. Come on, Square Enix, you could have tried a little bit harder than that, what the fuck?
Oh man, his hair is so sick. Oh man, his hair is so sick. Man, his hair is so sick. His hair is so sick.
Coincidentally, this also happens to be the name of the band of characters you play as in Final Fantasy XIII. Right off the bat, the story does fairly well at gradually introducing these seemingly unrelated characters one after the other, giving enough insight into their personality without giving away their history or intentions too quickly. The game opens to Lightning, a cold, short-tempered but capable tsundere commando taking over a train inside this expansive inner mountain yet still floating future metropolis thing, with Saz seemingly tagging along, helping as best he can despite clearly being just as confused about what she's on about as we viewers are. He also has a chicken in his hair, so he's good, we like him. Pan over to this guy who's also doing what Lightning's doing, but he just likes to talk a lot more about him doing it while he's doing it. That'd be Snow.
Heroes. Hero. Don't worry, Sarah. You're hero.
Amongst the civilians that have to put up with listening to Snow call himself a hero approximately 4,206.9 times a minute are the kiddies of the group, Hope and Vanille. Vanilla is this Australian bird who seems a tad bit too happy and excitable considering she's in a circumstance of seemingly imminent death, whereas Hope was there with his mother before a dodgy wartime speech from Hero Man convinced her to join the resistance in fighting the bad guys. She dies shortly afterwards. Hope pins this on Snow, and from here on out somehow strikes a perfect balance between being a traumatized, vindictive revenge seeker and an absolute wee-wee head. Now look guys, I'm sorry to be explicit, but if Hope ain't the biggest dickhead fucking bitch-ass wee-wee head that I've ever seen, then I'd be very surprised.
It's your fault,
You couldn't. Oh, this is yours.
Stop whinging! Jesus!
Setting the pace for the rest of the game, this chapter swaps you between playing each of the different characters for a bit. Eventually, they happen to all collect in one place, and at this point the game just unloads a metric arseload of terminology and jargon specific to the game's world, and you're supposed to make sense of it all. This was like my third or fourth time playing the game, so I actually kind of kept up with half of it this time, but if you're not paying utmost attention, it's a bit much to get your head around in the first hour of playing. Of course, you could read the summaries they provide for you in the data log in-game, but
That's nerd shit.
basically, there's two mini planets, Cocoon and Pulse. The reason these planets and the human race are even here in the first place are these big magic robot things called FFXIII. They provide food, electricity, infrastructure, sick anime hair, everything to the humans of Cocoon. Occasionally, bad guy FFXIII will mark humans with these cool ass tattoos, turning them into Lussie. Which doesn't seem too bad at first. Free tat, you even get some cool magic powers. Unfortunately, once you're marked, you're bound to fulfilling a specific focus in a certain amount of time. Get it done right, and legend says you turn into a crystal and are granted eternal life. Run out of time, and instead you become a Seath, which is some annoying ass zombie thing that you have to grind about 300 of throughout the game. Still with me? Have a breath. Right, the perception of Lassie within Cocoon's populace is one of complete and utter fear-mongering, and as a result, when news breaks of a Lassie being discovered in the seaside city of Bodom, the Sanctum, or government, order a purge, whereby everyone potentially in contact with them is sent away. Like if, instead of telling everyone potentially exposed to a COVID outbreak to self-isolate and quarantine for 14 days, we just shipped them off to Mars and called it a day. Coincidentally, this is effectively what happens to this girl here. Just edit the girl in. No, it's still just me. No, not that. Didn't want you to fucking reveal that. And in comparison with the rest of them, her name is pretty fucking lame. Sarah. God, I hope I never come into contact with someone whose name is that fucking mundane. Sarah gets made into a Lassie for some reason, and so naturally the Sanctum wishes to eliminate her with their army Psychon. So that would be all well and good, right? Bye-bye Sarah, tough luck. No. Dumbass. Not gonna lie, pretty fucking stupid of you to think that. I'm not angry, I'm just disappointed. Turns out Snow's actually engaged to Sarah. Lightning is Sarah's sister, who also happens to dislike the fact that Snow's engaged to Sarah, and I mean, who could blame her? And the other guys also happened to be at this fireworks show that happened a couple days prior at the same time Sarah was, which means they're potentially exposed, which to the Sanctum qualifies them to be purged. That's why they're all in the train together, they're getting purged, yay! I hope it makes the slightest bit of sense now that the whole gang's together. Snow wants to save Sarah, Lightning wants to save Sarah, Hope wants to kill Snow for getting his mum deaded, Vanille needs to remind him of this every half a second because he's too much of a wee head to do anything about it, and Saz has a chicken.
I'm in.
All of a sudden, Sarah appears. Why here of all places? Oh. She's a crystal now, so she must have completed her focus. Oh, I can't marry a crystal. I'm Angie, I want to speak to the manager. Oh, the manager is a giant mechanical pulse fallacy. Oh, we're all the sea now. With but a mere cryptic glimpse of what their focus might be, the group must now come to terms with effectively being both enemies of the state and ticking time bombs. They leave Snow behind, trying to single-handedly excavate his crystallized GF with a rusty ski pole, and eventually the group splits into two duos. Badass General Lightning has infinite stamina and conducts herself with absolute poise and purpose, now with the intention of taking down the entire Sanctum. As a result, she almost takes on a motherly role towards Hope, who coincidentally lost his mother about 10 minutes prior and also happens to be a right puss twat. Saz, on the other hand, is the complete opposite to Lightning. He lacks any sort of direction at all and seems utterly lost, his distraught cynicism and hopelessness contrasting well with Vanille's overt, energetic positivity. Witnessing both of these interesting dynamics develop into close relationships is a pleasure. Hope begins to gain the slightest measure of capability from Lightning, and Vanille seems to cheer Saz up a bit. Meanwhile, Snow gets picked up by number one waifu Fang, who for some reason is also Australian.
You want to keep breathing? Shut up and come quiet.
For the most part, the way the story is told is through cutscenes, most in-game, but some much higher quality movie-grade sequences. Carried by some solid voice acting and incredible cinematic visuals, These cutscenes are like a Tenga flip hole Model 8000. Adequately gripping. You'll have some moments of signature odd Final Fantasy dialogue here and there, the occasional repetitive conversation, and some frequent anime-style grunts and breaths where every character's response to any given stimulus, however mundane, happens to be audible.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
But nothing too unbearable. Something I did notice was how mundane the side characters were in this game. Like I mentioned before, this was my third or fourth time playing, and I didn't remember any of them. Since so much screen time is spent on the main cast, all the side characters are straight up irrelevant. Alongside the absence of towns, NPCs, and side quests, it's understandable that both Final Fantasy and RPG fans alike might have found it difficult to not only immerse themselves, but even be invested in the game's world. The central plot in Final Fantasy XIII does its best to tackle pretty broad topics like individualism, purpose, bigotry, government control, manipulation, and loss. And to be fair, it doesn't always hit the mark. For instance, I felt there wasn't quite enough reason to justify why there was such a complete and utter fear of Lucia in the human population, other than that it had always been that way. Only at the end of the damn game does this knobhead Psychom Lieutenant man finally realize that maybe our gang of Lucia here aren't all that interested in exterminating the human population that they were previously a part of. The writing tends to not dwell too long on the heavy stuff though, and instead puts the focus on the characters caught up in it. These moments that best portray the characters' feelings, flaws, goals, or relationships, what really matters to them, are exactly what carry the story. Hope giving a child her toy back, Saz's complete moral deadlock, the emergence of each character's eidolon in the moments they felt most lost. Vanille and Fang's history and unbreakable bond, Hope finally confronting Snow before them both having to tell Hope's dad of his wife's passing. Despite the gameplay's extreme linearity, the storytelling in Final Fantasy XIII makes for some of the game's most memorable moments that kept me glued to the screen.
It saved me.
As I mentioned folks, gameplay in the first 10 hours of Final Fantasy XIII is, well, about as linear and straightforward as a Welsh man's willy in a shearing shed. You pretty much walk in a straight line from one orange exclamation mark to a cutscene to the next exclamation mark to another cutscene with some enemy creep scattered throughout. It is quite rudimentary, and I can understand why existing Final Fantasy fans accustomed to a more free roaming approach would not be too happy with it. Combat implements an ATB or active time battle system. It's kind of like turn-based battles, except not really. You use the slots in your ATB gauge to queue up abilities, some costing just one slot, others costing 6.
Than you thought, huh?
I imagine the intention here was to make the combat feel more engaging and realistic, as I don't imagine in World War II the Allies were patiently waiting for the Axis to make their move first before they did. It's an okay replacement to a traditional turn-based approach in theory. The main point of difference between the two approaches here is time. In turn-based, time doesn't matter. You can take as long as you want to make a decision. In theory, with ATB, you need to make your decisions within the brief period that your gauge is charging up before you start wasting time. It seems like the intention with these time constraints is to speed things up, but in practice it feels like it does the opposite. No one can be asked to manually input commands every single turn of every single fight of every single chapter. 9 times out of 10, you're generally just going to opt for the auto battle option instead. So in reality, having to wait for your ATB gauge to fill up means a fair portion of combat is spent not really doing a lot. It's white space that otherwise wouldn't be there in a turn-based approach, where you simply use as much time as you need. That being said, there are pros and cons to each. I like that ATB demands more consistent attention, and the occasional time you do assess a manual input is superior to just hitting auto battle feels rewarding. Regardless, in Final Fantasy XIII's case, the saving grace bread and butter of the combat is the chain stagger and paradigm systems. And for your sake, so you don't have to read the classic JRPG style wall of text tutorials in game, I'll try my best to explain it to you here. First and foremost, every enemy has a stagger meter, and hitting them builds this up. When you eventually fill it up completely, the enemy becomes staggered, which means they're a lot more vulnerable. They take more damage, some enemies even lose abilities. In any case, the vast majority of battles are won through staggering your enemy. Especially because your battle rating and hence reward is based off how quickly you manage to win the given encounter. In combat, there's 6 roles, and each of the 5 characters starts off being pretty good at 3 of them. You got commandos, ravagers, medics, sentinels, synergists, and my personal favorite, saboteurs. You've also got this. Not in the game, but it exists. Prior to battle, you can establish a set of paradigms, which are kind of like different formations where each member of your team takes on one of these roles. Different paradigms can be used to buff your team, debuff enemies, tank or heal damage, quickly build enemy chain gauges, or maximize damage output once an enemy is staggered, or whichever combination of these you think works best. You can swap paradigms at any time in battle, and doing so actually replenishes one of your ATB gauges. This system made ATB fun for me.
Follow my lead!
The decision making isn't so much about choosing the best specific abilities each turn, but rather maximizing efficiency with your team's compositions, and establishing a rhythm where you're swapping frequently enough to reap the benefits of the ATB replenishment. With each enemy having different strengths, weaknesses, and behavior patterns, a great deal of challenge comes with assessing the compositions most effective at dealing with them in the smallest amount of time. Though as far as I'm aware, the game doesn't tell you about this ATB replenishment. I found out about it online. I think encouraging regular paradigm swaps by actually informing players that this mechanic exists would help a higher percentage of them experience everything that combat has to offer, especially at its weaker points in the early stages of the game. Every character has their strengths and weaknesses. Lightning starts off as an impressive early game commando before becoming one of the best ravagers late game. Snow excels as a beefy, tanky as fuck sentinel. Zaz gets haste really early. Hope's gameplay capabilities mirror that of him in the story, where he starts off a large puss twat before his magic stat starts to scale up. Fang is the #1 late game commando, and Vanille is
Tougher than you thought, huh?
Progression is tied to each role, so you can choose which of each character's roles you'd like them to improve in. And eventually, the game lets you level up any character in any role, which allows for far more flexibility with characters and paradigms. On top of this, with a nice upgrade system that's got enough depth to play an important role in your team's strength and still have a learning curve without being too complicated, the progression in Final Fantasy XIII is rewarding and provides some replay value in allowing for moderate experimentation with approaching the game. I will say, the game does take its bloody time to introduce more mechanics and abilities as it goes, and this probably doesn't help with the whole 10-hour tutorial title it's been given. I stand by liking the combat system a lot, but it takes a while to ramp up. If you'd have asked me when I was still in the early points in the game, I wouldn't be as confident in it. And even then, a large portion of late game max level content like upgraded weapons and accessories are both unnecessary and unattainable before the conclusion of the game's storyline. There is some high level content beyond this in the form of the many simple slay this enemy Seath quests, and perhaps to a completionist this would be much appreciated, but with no story left to uncover I struggled to find the drive to bother. I think pushing forward access to all of this additional content and spreading it out evenly across the different stages of the game while raising the difficulty of battles across the board to compensate could help iron out the skewed entertainment value of the gameplay. The game has so much in place to minimize how tedious grindy turn-based combat can be, epic music, cinematic camera work, and flashy spell effects, but I feel that on occasion this just makes the most basic dumbed down grinding fights feel that much more silly.
Let's even these odds!
But a saving grace for me here is that there aren't any random encounters. If, like me, you don't like subjecting yourself to hours of pointless grinding, you can actually just straight up avoid most enemies. Basically, if you touch an enemy, you'll initiate combat. So if, like me, you don't like touching people, then just don't! Or better yet, run up on them without them seeing you first and you'll get a preemptive strike, where you'll take the enemy by surprise and fill their stagger bar instantly at the start of the fight, which is especially busted on enemies whose gauges otherwise take eons to charge up. Early fights don't give much XP anyway, so I avoided most early game non-mandatory also not guarding an item capsule fights this playthrough, and as if by magic, actually finished the game this time. By the time you finally get some less linear, free-roaming optional content, combat's a lot more enjoyable anyway. In gorgeous graphics that still hold up to this day, this game's world is, much like a prepubescent wet dream, densely imaginative and a pleasure to be a part of. Thematically, Final Fantasy strikes a clever, intriguing balance between mystical fantasy and futuristic sci-fi elements. Take Eidolons, for example, these giant, intricate, magical beings that emerge from a lassie when they're at their lowest point. You can summon them in battle where they use all these cool magic spells, and better yet, each one is a fucking transformer. Shiva sisters? Transformer! Motorbike. Odin? Transformer! Horse. Alexander? Build a wall! The environments range from an entire river turned to crystal, to vast grassy plateaus, to elevated floating cities, to the top of a giant futuristic airship.
Attention all crew, code green. Repeat, code green. Security forces stand by. Hostile forces on board, code green.
The visual design.
Code purple, I repeat, code purple. Security breach. All units on alert, code purple.
Colonel! We've lost the intruders! That means we're code yellow. No, wait. Code blue? If we were orange, that would mean...
Look, I'm really trying here.
The escapees made it through! They're entering the engine room!
No! Damn the sea!
Desperate times demand flexibility. Code white.
Okay, I think I got this one. The visual design of the characters, their clothing and weapons, eidolons, the cinematic camera angles in combat, the crisp, snappy and easy to read user interface, flashy spell effects, the variation of enemy creatures, the frequent movie grade cutscenes in between chapters, the fact that the damn level up screen looks like this. This game is so polished, you can see your own reflection on it. Twice. Backwards. This level of detail contrasts well with a touch of minimalism here and there too. Take the menu screen for instance. The signature theme song, a logo, some text and 3 options in front of a plain white background. So simple yet so memorable. So memorable that apparently I made my own shit version of it in Scratch years ago. I don't think I quite achieved the same effect, yet somehow this project got 1,000 fucking views on Scratch. There isn't even a game here, it's literally just a menu screen. I didn't even bother making more than that, and it's got probably 10 times more views than this damn video will ever get, with 10 times less effort. And the music. Oh my god, the music! The staggering soundtrack of more than 80 songs held up by distinct orchestral violin and piano melodies does exactly what it should. Every single track feels like it strikes the exact chord, creates the exact mood and atmosphere that it was meant to. I purchased the damn CD set for this game before I'd even finished it properly, despite the fact that CD players had gone extinct about the same time that the Ermagerd meme was funny. 4,206.9 years ago. It might seem ironic that I've spent a fraction of the time talking about the game's exceptional visual and auditory appeal than I did its writing and gameplay, but it's just because there isn't really a whole lot more to say about it. Other than, much like the ability to distinguish the color red from green, it's good. Final Fantasy XIII's release came with a fair amount of criticism towards the level of linearity not typically seen in the RPG genre. Director Motomo Toriyama felt that the lower than expected review scores it received came from reviewers who approached the game from the wrong point of view, stating that it can become very difficult to tell a compelling story when players are given that much freedom. Being a drastic switch up from not only the existing games in the Final Fantasy series, but the entire RPG genre, Final Fantasy XIII aspired to be something different. And with an established following, this can be an extremely difficult decision to make. Honestly, this game might not even really be an RPG. Considering how linear everything is, you aren't playing a role by making pivotal decisions in game. Yet, even when diverging from the series' existing gameplay formula, the 13th edition still kept in check the signature polish and innovation that Final Fantasy is known and loved for. Despite the occasional melodrama or odd piece of dialogue that Final Fantasy is also known for, and the slightly anticlimactic ending, the writing throughout is engaging, enticing, and the characters each have depth and charm, making it more about the entire journey than the final closing scene. Combat is engaging, rhythmic, and strategic, and progression feels well balanced throughout, whilst allowing for some decent experimentation or specialization that can be tailored to suit the player. The visual design is exceptional, and it exhibits an acute awareness of the benefit that attention to detail can have towards a game's overall image and level of immersion. The soundtrack... To me, this game exemplified the concept of changing things up and everything involved in that process. The risks and the challenges, but also the rewards and the lessons learned. Take a franchise like Pokemon, whose video games pretty much haven't changed since the dawn of time, when Ermagerd was still funny, and you will understand why sometimes a drastic change of direction can definitely pay off. Final Fantasy XIII felt like a project that was distinctly aware of its weaknesses, yet didn't let these detract from where it absolutely excelled. Maybe it's because I wasn't an existing fan of the series, maybe it's because I love violins and pianos, maybe it's because Vanille is tougher than I thought, but this was a game that, despite wearing its flaws on its sleeve, I loved anyway. All in all, Final Fantasy XIII is, much like how cute I was in high school in comparison to now, 7. Psych, being linear? Fucking so out of fashion. Tell me one person who's straight. One. You can't. Final Fantasy XIII is fucking trash. Get that shit out of here. But Final Fantasy XIII 2? That one's a winner. Thank God this shit is finally over. Yeah, did you not need any of us at all this time? Yeah, it's been kind of lonely without the blue guy around. Well, I've tried telling you all to fuck off, but clearly it isn't working, so I intend to just pretend you're not here anymore. Same approach I apply with most problems in life, frankly. Look, I know we haven't been much help so far, but I want to make it up to you. I was looking through your wardrobe the other day, and I found someone. And I was thinking that maybe you could fill in the blank space that Blue Sam left behind. Come on out, man. Look, can a guy not catch a break? What do you want? You cannot be serious. Another one of you beanie fuck bastards. I'm ending the channel. This is it. Do you know who I am? I'm the editor. Do you know how fucked you would be without me? I sit up late every night, painstakingly clicking away in Premiere Pro, feeling what little life I have left, slowly yet surely draining away from me. My eyes are burning. I've developed a unique strain of RSI in my wrists. My back is problem. Why the fuck do you need a stupid little blur effect on every single shot and every single transition? I'm going insane! Yeah, on second thought, maybe you're right. This guy's killing my vibe. We should get rid of it. I just said I'm the editor. Don't fuck with me. Yeah, not the brightest tool in the shed, that one. Look, I admit I can be a grumpy twat to you guys sometimes, and to be honest, I would probably be quite lonely without you here. It's just a yellow guy that I can't be asked for, you know? You know what? Pink Sam, you can stay. Welcome to the shitty family, my friend. Yeah! Woo! Ah, fuck! Yeah! Woo! Yeah! Oh, good. Yeah. I'm so glad I could keep editing. Yeah! Yay! Welcome back. You didn't miss a lot. Yeah, where did he send you anyway? I don't know. It was just nothing. Emptiness. Something truly indescribable. It's times like these that highlight the limitations of the human expression. No arrangement of words, no visual images could even hope to emulate what I just experienced. I'd always visualized the concept of emptiness as this vast, ever-present black. Now I understand. I was still applying a visual to it. There is no visual. There is no anything. It's just pure nothing. How is it that, wait, what color beanie was that handsome guy wearing before?